Welcome back to the video. This is video 2. If you haven't seen the first video, go watch that now to get caught up. I will probably link that somewhere here. As things started getting worse, my family started kind of, I don't want to say breaking apart, but things got bad in the family. Attitudes got worse. Everybody was mean a lot. Stepsisters stopped going to school and started staying up all night. My stepmom started running around on my dad. She was staying out at all hours of the night with whomever, doing whatever. And it didn't help that right around the corner from our house was a bar. And that's where the two of them, my dad and stepmom, liked to go a lot on the weekends. And they would close the bar down. And it was nice because they could walk. They didn't have to drive. And, they could walk there and walk home. But she started going on her own throughout the week. And just her life kind of fell apart. That caused a lot of turmoil within the family, and at some point she decided she was going to straighten herself out, and she started going to church. And she tried a few different churches, and she would take us kids with her. My dad wasn't really a church kind of guy, so he didn't ever go, but we went to a few different churches over a couple of months, I guess, and eventually she settled on the Mormon church, which was an interesting choice, but they were really the best experience we had of all the churches and denominations we went to. And the people there were the nicest. The vibe at the church was actually much better than any other church we had gone to, which credit to them. I didn't know anything about the Mormons back then. I didn't have any kind of bias towards them, but I loved going to that church and I loved the people that were there. We started having missionaries that came to our house once a week to give us a lesson. And those two guys were two of the coolest guys I've really ever met as far as like church goes. At that time, like I said, things were kind of rough with the family. The home life kind of sucked. And those two guys were a bright spot. And I really looked forward to seeing them every week. They made sure to schedule us last for the day so that after the lesson, they could go outside with us kids and play with us. They'd toss a ball, just hang out. And it was a lot of fun. I don't know where they are now or even their names anymore, but if they somehow stumble upon this video, thank you for everything you did. You made a lasting impression on me, and I appreciate everything you did for us. After a while, my sister stopped going to church, and it was just me and my stepmom going. So when they would come by for the weekly lessons, we were the only ones usually in the house when they came by. And one day they came for their lesson, and they were in the living room setting their stuff up, whatever it was they had to do to prepare for their lesson. My stepmom was in the kitchen. I believe she was finishing up some dishes or something, and I went to the bathroom. And when I came out of the bathroom, it was right across the hall from that little bedroom that my stepsisters slept in. At the time, my oldest it was her room again, and she had fixed her window so that she could go in and out of it without getting stuck because she liked to sneak out at night. Now, I'm not sure the timeline here. This was clearly before she had left the house. Maybe it was one of the times she had come back to live with us. I can't remember. But we all knew she had done that with the window, but nobody ever fixed it. I came out of the bathroom and looked across the hall into her room, and on her window, which was closed, was like 100 giant flies walking around on the inside of the window. They weren't flying around the room. They weren't buzzing, but they were definitely moving all over the window. So I went into the kitchen and I told my stepmom, I said, look, there's all these flies. And she came with me and we stood at the door and looked in and she saw them as well. So she said, I'm going to go around back outside and open the window from the outside and let them all out. I said, cool. I went and sat down on the couch waiting for the two missionaries to get ready for their lesson. My stepmom came in and she said, they're all gone. I said, you let them out? She said, no, they weren't there. So I got up and we went to the door and looked in. Not a fly in the room. And at that moment, both missionaries stood up and said, "We got to go." And they just left. No idea why. They left their stuff there and just left. Gave no reason. They had come by for a while after that, and I asked them about it, and they wouldn't talk about it. I don't know why they left. I don't know if a voice said "get out" or what, but yeah, they dipped, and I still to this day have no idea why. And I know that it sounds a lot like Amityville Horror, right? I even knew it back then. This is just like that movie because I had just seen the movie, and I've only learned since that in some cases, if you are in a home with a bad entity or paranormal stuff going on and you get like a random swarm of insects in one particular spot with no real logical explanation, it's probably why, because it's this evil presence in the house, right? And that's what I think it was back then. Definitely creepy, for sure. After that, my stepmom kind of fell back into her old ways, and I was the only one going to church. But because she wasn't going to church, I didn't have a way there. It was across town. So the church set up one of the members like to come and get me every Sunday and take me home. And at one point, I started getting sick on Sundays, like the flu sick. I was fine on the Saturday before, I was fine on the Monday after, but on those Sundays, and it happened 3 weeks in a row, I would just be nauseous, sick, terrible. And so I would call and say, "Look, don't come and get me, I'm sick." So after the third time, they finally said, "Well, if you're going to keep calling off, we're just not going to come and get you anymore." And that was the end of me going to church. It wasn't until much later that I learned how the Mormon church was, and I was like, ooh, dodged a bullet there. No offense, but I mean, kind of offense. That is what happened with the church. They caused, I guess, some flies. The missionaries dipped, and I quit going to church because I was getting sick. My best friend at the time, John, he lived right around the corner next door to that bar. And we spent a lot of time at each other's houses, especially in the summer. We would stay the night with each other a lot. And so the first time we had an issue, or he had an issue, he was staying the night, and we were both in my bed, which was a twin. We could both fit in it back then. And I woke up, and he was standing next to my bed, and he was like shaking his shorts out. And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Somebody poured water on him." And I was like, "Are you serious? Did you just like pee the bed?" And he was like, "No, I don't do that. Somebody poured water on me. When I woke up, I heard a man laughing in the hall." And I believe at that time, the only other guy in the house, it was just me, John, and my dad. And my dad we could still hear him snoring. We walked around the house looking. Nobody was there. The front and back door were locked. So I checked, and yeah, he was soaked, but my mattress was soaked, and the mattress was sitting on a piece of wood, like, I don't think it was plywood, but it was a thin piece of wood. And there was so much water that it went through my mattress, through that piece of wood, and it was still dripping on the floor under my bed. And I did smell it. I mean, it was cold water, and it did not have a smell. So he definitely didn't pee the bed. I couldn't figure out why I didn't hear like that much water being poured. I would have heard the splash. It had to have happened quickly, otherwise if it was poured slowly so it didn't make a sound, he would have woken up and saw who was doing it. I didn't wake up to the laugh either. Like, none of it woke me up. I woke up and he was standing next to the bed dealing with that. Very strange. The next thing that happened, he stayed the night. I woke up the next morning and he wasn't there. So I went to his house and I'm like, "Dude, what happened? Like, why did you come home?" I was a little pissed. He said that he woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and when he came out of the bathroom, he heard somebody on the couch tell him to go home. And he said it sounded like my stepmom. And when he looked over, he could just see a silhouette of somebody sitting on the couch. And they asked him to go home, and he said, okay. So he went home. And so I was mad. I went home and I asked my stepmom, like, did you tell him to go home overnight? And she was like, no, why would I do that? He's always here. Like, I don't care that he's here. And I was like, yeah, why would you do that? And to this day, no idea what happened there. And I've since spoken to her about it, and she was like, yeah, I have no idea what happened there. It was not me. So the last thing that happened to John, which I did not know until many years later, he said one night he got up, he was thirsty, so he went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and he sat on the couch to drink the water. And he said the TV popped on while he was sitting there, and he just stared at it for a minute like, did that really just happen? And he watched the TV for a minute, and then finally he went and put the glass still with water in it on the counter in the kitchen. And he went back to my bedroom and he sat on the floor until morning, and he just listened to the TV play in the living room. And he said when it got light outside, the TV just shut itself off. Nobody had gotten up. So he got up and left the room thinking somebody had been up, but nobody else was awake. And he said he went into the kitchen to get his water, but the glass was put away. And those are John's stories. Some other things that happened around that time, because my stepmom was like running around again on my dad, things were getting worse at home. My oldest stepsister, she moved out again. She was gone for good. I'm not sure where my stepsister, who was my age, was. I think she also left to go somewhere else. We were all young, by the way. My oldest stepsister, I think, is 2 years older than me, and I was probably 12 then, 13. So, yeah, we were all young at this point. My youngest stepsister was still there, though I rarely saw her. I think by this point I had moved in with my mom across town, and so I wasn't there for the worst of it. My dad said he would come home from work. He was a garbage man at the time, and he would go to bed early at night. He would wake up at like 3 a.m. to go to work, and he was usually home by noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And he would come home and see like guys jumping out of bedroom windows. So he went in and nailed all the windows shut. That comes up later. But yeah, he nailed all the windows shut. And often when he would go to bed, he would be like the only one in the house. And one night he was pulled off of his bed by one ankle. It dragged him and all the blankets off the bed. He jumped up and walked around the house looking for whomever it was that did that, but nobody was in the house with him. He started having bad dreams. I had bad dreams as well when I was still there. Like right when things started getting bad. One of the dreams that I remember having was I was in my elementary school, which I was still in at the time, but it was at nighttime. All the lights were on. I was in the cafeteria, and the cafeteria was like the main part of the school. It was the biggest room in the school, and a lot of the classrooms were off of the cafeteria. And I walked through the cafeteria towards my classroom. I was in third grade at the time, and I was looking into the classroom. Through the door was like all glass, and I could see my teacher sitting at his desk grading papers or whatever, but he didn't see me. And then all of the desks and chairs in the classroom started spinning around the room like there was a tornado in the classroom. But he didn't even seem to notice. His desk was fine. He was fine. He kept grading papers, but all the students' desks were spinning around the room. And I felt this pressure in my head, this horrible pressure. When I woke up, I was like hot and sweaty, and that pressure was still in my head. I started feeling this just nastiness in my bedroom, and it was so bad that I stopped staying in my bedroom. I stopped going in there. In the morning, I would run in and grab my clothes and change and run back out. And every time I would go into my room, I could feel like entering the door, I could feel like the change in the air. It was just thick and electric and nasty. And as soon as I'd go back out into the hall, it was like gone, like just stepping across this threshold. And after like a month or so, it stopped. and I started going back in my room again. Up until that point, I was like sleeping on the couch in the living room because, oh, it was just terrible. And the dream my dad had, it was recurring. He would be sleeping on the couch because he didn't feel safe in his own bed. And he had a ball bat that he slept with next to him. And he had this dream where he would be in like a third world country with all these starving children standing around him, reaching up at him, grabbing at him. And then he would blink and he would be on the couch, laying on the couch in the living room, but all these kids would be standing around him, reaching down at him and grabbing at him. And he said worms would start coming out of their mouths and their nose and their eyes, and he would scream and wake up and like catch his breath. And so like bad dreams kind of went along with this house. That all led up to the last things that really happened at the house before everybody finally moved out. And that was, he awoke one night when he heard a slam. And when he was sleeping on the couch, he left the bathroom door and the 3 bedroom doors open. And he looked around and my bedroom door was shut and it was shaking like somebody was inside trying to get out. So he grabbed the bat and he went to the door thinking that his, my stepmom or her guy friends or whomever was in there messing with him. So he would call her name, but nobody would say anything. And he said the door kept shaking violently, and inside he could hear my 2 closet doors and my 2 windows opening and slamming shut over and over. And he finally got the nerve to open the door, and when he did, all of the slamming stopped, and he went in and checked the room. Both windows were still nailed shut. He went outside and asked the neighbors if they had seen anybody come out of the windows, and they said no, but they heard all the noise going on. And he went back into the house, and my door slammed shut, and the whole thing continued. And so he just sat on the couch and turned the TV on as loud as it would go to drown out the noise, and he sat there until he had to go to work. Later, he ran into my stepmom, who at this point, they were kind of like getting along. They realized that the marriage was over, but they were just getting along for the sake of getting along. And he ran into her at the bar, and she said, by the way, this happened to me the other day. And she told him the exact same thing happened to her. And he was like, well, it happened to me too. So multiple people had that experience. They also had a mutual friend at the bar, this older man who I guess got too drunk one night and needed a place to stay. So they let him stay at the house, and he was the only one in there. And he had the same experience with my room. Yeah. Wild stuff. By the time we got out of there, it was definitely past time, but it was needed. It was necessary. In 1996, 2 years after we moved out, I was 16. I was hanging out with my dad, and we were hanging out at a friend of his who lived in the same house that John had lived in years before. And when we were leaving, I said to my dad, I'd like to go see the house since it's right around the corner. And my dad was like, nah, I really don't want to do that. He finally relented and he drove me over there. The bank had taken possession of the house and they had fixed it up. So it was nice inside, but nobody lived in it yet. And it had been 2 years since we were gone. So he parked in the driveway and turned his van off. I got out by myself. He didn't want to get out. And I walked around the house looking in the windows, just kind of reminiscing, despite how terrible it had been living there, I grew up in that house. So I looked in all the windows and it was kind of like everything just came back to me. But when I got to that window that had the flies on it, my sister's small bedroom, I couldn't look in the window. It was like looking in a mirror. That was weird. That was the only window in the house that did that. So then I got back in the van and my dad tried to start it and it wouldn't start. And he tried 2 or 3 times to turn it over and it wouldn't start. And he said, if I got to get out of this van in this driveway and try to fix it in this driveway, I'm going to disown you. And he tried it again and it started and we left. A few months later, he called me and he said, just to let you know, that van never did that before or after going to that house. Kind of weird. I guess the house knew we were there and it didn't want us to leave. So in 2008, I was delivering pizzas in the neighborhood. and I got a delivery to that house. When the guy came to the door, I gave him his food and I got the money, and I said, before I go, I'd like to ask if anything strange ever happens in this house. And he started telling me how he's like a warrior for God or something, and he fears no evil. And I was like, thank you. You've answered my question. And I left. So to make a long story short, which I can't do at this point, after the pandemic, I saw on Facebook that this production company who makes a show like, I think it was Paranormal Witness, where people tell their stories and then like actors reenact the things that the people are telling. They were looking for new stories. And so I reached out, and the producer called me from London, I believe, and interviewed me over the phone about it. And he was interested in making an episode about our house, but he wanted more than one person to be on camera telling these stories to lend credibility. And so I reached out to my stepmom, two of my stepsisters, and my dad, and none of them would do it. So it never happened. Thanks again for hanging out with me. I will have more videos coming up with many other paranormal experiences I've had in my life. Have a good one. Thanks again. Talk to you next time.